other ways. Vishwajyoti Ghosh and Mustansir Dalvi in conversation with Vittal Rajan.
So I want to confess, I'm an old duffer and I have not kept pace with all that is new and wonderful that's been written. So I'm an ignoramus in this session, and I'm asking Professor Dalvi and Mr. Ghosh to give me gyan. So this session is going to be of two learned people giving an old duffer gyan. So though I'm old, I am still a student and I can learn. Now, I think all of you know Professor Dalvi is a professor, very well-known professor of architecture at the JJ College of Architecture in Bombay, and Mr. Ghosh is a graphic novelist. This is something so wonderful. I've heard about graphic novels, and the only thing I know about graphic novels is Superman, which I read when I was a boy, and much later Asterix and Tintin. So I would love to do a graphic novel before I pass on, so I'm sure Mr. Ghosh will instruct me. So let us start, sir. Dalvi Sahab, you are an architect and you are a poet. And not only a poet, but you have translated Faiz Ahmed Faiz and Iqbal into English, which is another totally different skill. Translation itself, as we know, a lot can get lost in translation. But to be able to, as a one poet, translate the poetry of another person from a language like Urdu into English, I think is a great gift. So what I want to start with is that in terms of, as I see, there are two sensibilities enclosed within your heart. One is the sensibility of an architect, and the other is the sensibility of a poet. Now, which informs what? In the sense that both these sensibilities require a certain amount of elegance in what is produced. My father was a mathematician, and he was never happy unless the solution was elegant. He said, all mathematicians, when the solution is elegant, you stop, because you know it is true. If it is a messy solution, then you know you haven't got to the truth of it. So elegance is at the heart of both systems. Though these days, I mean, we are no longer need to write in iambic pentameters or whatever. And there was a time when Lord Byron said about Wordsworth that he makes all poetry prose and all prose poetry. But these days, I mean, we are far more Catholic about it, and we accept a lot. But still, but even then, even though we accept a lot today, there is still something very different about the quality of poetry, which is the music of words. So I want to ask you to start off this session by asking you, which sensibility of yours informs what?
Thank you for the question. These are things I don't dwell upon very deeply. You just kind of go out and do it. But since you ask, I think I can refer back to what Ranjit said about poesis. It's all about shaping something. And in that sense, both architecture and poetry are similar because they can be shaped. I don't think that I have ever imagined poetry to be written or even imagined it as these great flourishes. It's not that. It's always these little things which are brought together. There is another sensibility that brings architecture and poetry together, and that is something that I am much more interested in, and that is the notion of iteration. You know, when you are doing design, when you design anything, a library, for example, one makes some basic sketches and things like that, but then the long process after that is an iterative process where you do the same thing over and over again, fine-tuning, removing glitches, making things elegant, as you said, until you are fairly confident that you have reached the end of the design. And I think the same thing is true, at least with me, for poetry, because the writing of poetry is something that gives me nightmares every time. I have a aversion, even bordering on disgust, about the act of writing it. And somehow it is done. But everything after that is great enjoyment, because poetry is edited and re-edited and shaped and reshaped, which is something I enjoy doing tremendously. So I think there are these commonalities between the two.
Well, may I ask a supplementary question to that? You mentioned enhancers and nuancers in terms of reading architecture.
Yes.
When you talk about iteration in poetry, are there techniques of adding nuancers and enhancers in terms of words?
Oh, that's wonderful. I have to say that the enhancers and nuancers which are being referred to are actually words that I invented as part of my doctoral studies to describe Art Deco architecture, which is what I was doing my doctoral research on. And to put it very simply, Art Deco architecture, just like a building like this, has a lot of ornamentation, which I described in two ways. Is that enhancers are things that ornament the building as it is. So if it is a box, then there are lines of the edges of the box which enhance the box itself. But nuancers are more symbolic elements, where you have, say, faces and animals and plants and things like that. So say, for example, in this room, most of the ornamentation you see would be enhancers. Do we have enhancers and nuances in poetry? I think so, perhaps. Of course, this was a book that wasn't commissioned or anything like that. It was just done out of general enthusiasm. And once it was done, I showed it to my poet friends and translator friends, Ranjit amongst them, who liked what I had done, even organized a program for me at Penn to read out the translation afresh of an unpublished person completely. And then Penguin kind of found it worthwhile. This is not the first English translation that has been done of Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa. In 81, I think, Khushwant Singh did that, and perhaps it's been done earlier as well. Arbery did that, and so on. So, no, I think it was done more in a sense of enthusiasm for the language, which is what attracted me in the first place to Iqbal. The language is intensely powerful in Urdu, and you can understand how it could have, elevated the hearts of the people who were listening to it. And then I thought of, trying to see whether one can do the same thing in English, which is why the whole project kind of started. And like I said, it was only when it was done that I showed it around and people liked it. So I didn't think too much about the nuances of how it is going to be appreciated in this increasingly conservative and touchy climate that we are living in currently. But like I said, I think it came out a little before all these things have now reached a certain tipping point.
Yeah, well, in this context, I'd like to ask you why you think that you would hesitate today. The reason I'm asking is that in the South Asian culture, complaining to God or abusing God was considered a very personal relationship all
Absolutely.
human beings had.
Absolutely.
We were children of God, and we have a right to shout at God, and you can't insult a prophet or you can't insult a priest, but you can say what you like about God, and this was generally accepted. But now, as you said, the atmosphere seems to be shrinking.
But do you know something? This is a very, very interesting point that you made. But if you put it in the context of Iqbal, I think he wrote Shikwa in 1909. And during that time, if you look at the other things he's writing about, he was considered one of the great poets of India. And he was appreciated by all the people, even in the freedom movement and so on. His poetry was taught to school children across the country, Bache Ki Dua is one of the poems which, people from a certain generation have bound to have learned. And so on. He wrote poems about India, the landscape, Himalaya, Ravi Kinare. He wrote about the Buddha, he wrote about Nanak, he wrote about Ram, he translated the Gayatri Mantra into Urdu. So you're right that at that time he would probably have been considered part of that overall scheme of India, where doing something is fairly part of the culture. But today, since he has already been made into a sort of deified figure, especially in Pakistan, I suppose anything you do, somebody or the other would find touchy about it.
But he was not the only one, in the sense that Maulana Hazrat Mahani, now he was not only a staunch nationalist, he was one of the people who framed the Indian Constitution. And he wrote in praise of Krishna.
Oh, yes.
And he also said that, rough English translation, the path of love is to admire beauty or worship beauty, this kind of thing. Now, I have a recording of Bade Ghulam Ali Khan saying Om Tat Sat, also of Pandit Jasraj singing Mere Allah Meherban.
Yes.
Now, most probably the people who are opposed to this are not in this audience. But you think these recordings cannot be played again? Over again?
No, they can be, and in fact they have to be. Because that is the only form of resistance for this kind of complete disassociation between two religions and, this bicultural divisions which all have already been talked about earlier as nonsense. And it has to be shown as nonsense. Like one of the great examples of today's time is T.M. Krishna, who is this absolutely wonderful Carnatic singer. And he has said that, every month he will record a song in praise of Allah or Jesus. And he goes into this wonderful thing. He did a concert in a cathedral in Bombay, I think, and he sang a lot of Carnatic music. And one of the songs he sang was in praise of Allah. Imagine that, a song in praise of Allah in a cathedral by a Carnatic singer who otherwise would be singing perhaps hymns and things like that. And that is the great, mix that we are all part of, and we should all, feel so happy about. Anything other than that, I think, is artificial and unnecessary.
So, in a sense, when we try to make a meaning, you have written a lot about finding meaning in architecture. Now, words, poetry, all of that is supposed to be much more accessible in terms of meaning. But seems to me in today's political climate, it is not only what the poet or the author means when he or she writes, but what the reader or the listener, how he or she interprets it. That seems to take priority over whatever the author has meant. We find so many cases of people being killed. And I would like to ask my friends here, there was so much fuss made about Hussein's drawing of Goddess Saraswati.
Yes.
And even my very liberal friend said he should not have done it. Why did he not draw Aisha? Now, with great difficulty, I got an electronic copy of his line drawing. It is a very chaste drawing. Like Ravi Verma's painting of the goddess Saraswati. There is a sense of peace, there is a sense of creative silence. Maybe I'm a fool, but I don't find in that sketch anything offensive. What is offensive is, how dare a Muslim do this? I would have thought that it's one of these Taliban Maulanas would have objected rather than Hindus for a bhakta to portray a divinity, that he or she is interested in is very natural. And I would also like to say that historically, I mean, this could just be apocryphal, as many of our stories are, but it is said that Kalidasa actually railed against the goddess Saraswati because he did not get the award as the premier poet. He said, "Aham ke maham rande." No words could be more offensive than that. And the goddess Saraswati later, of course, says that you are me and I am you. But in today's translation, Kalidasa would have been killed. And since he and Saraswati are inseparable, Saraswati would have also been killed.
I think when you are talking about Hussain, I think a couple of things are missed out in this particular episode. One is that sketch was done about 25 or 30 years prior. So it is only the current sensibilities who have got their hackles up. Okay, the parents of the current people would probably have found this perfectly okay. They wouldn't even know. Or they wouldn't even know about it. That is one thing. The other thing, which I think is wonderful about M.F. Hussain, is the fact that he was born in Pandharpur. And his entire, there is one entire sensibility which probably brings him as a child of Pandharpur, probably the notions of, going and doing the darshan of Vitthal and the Wari, which goes to Pandharpur each year, things which he must have intimately known and participated in.
He's written about it.
And he's written about it. He's even, I think, painted Vitthal in one of his paintings and so on. So it is irrelevant, other than you want to rake up an issue for your own political gains. There is no substance.
I think it's not only about the current regime. It's not only limited to post-2014. It's been going on for many decades now. It's the discovery of convenience that has happened.
Yeah.
This is a drawing that was made much before. And it got what it got, making Hussain a completely non-resident. The Ambedkar cartoon in the school was made in the 50s by Shankar.
Yes, that one, yes.
It was a completely ridiculous discovery, happened on a Friday, stall the parliament, get it out of the book. I think NCRT did a very brave act by putting in a series of cartoons that talked about making of the constitution, which gave you that space to laugh. But it was conveniently discovered when a so-called secular government was in power, and it didn't take much time for the parliament to say, okay, ban the cartoons, out the head. And the minister who did that became the president later.
Yeah.
So it's not about one particular party. It's about a lack of tolerance overall, and how the whole system has now become, one is playing the B side over the A side. That is what's happened. So to say that it's only about this particular regime, I don't think so. I think it's been happening for a while, and you let it happen. I mean, films have been brought down, channels have been brought down much before this. So this whole concept of intolerance of where are we going and has been going on, and today it's got that legitimacy of a governance.
And it's got to a level of impunity that is
the normalcy of
the normalcy, that's right.
So, Professor Dalvi, I'll come back to you about the architectural aspects, with particular interest that we all have about what we can do about Ooty. So, I will come back to you later. But since we are talking about cartoons and drawings, so as I said, I really wish to be educated about graphic novels, and for many of us who have not seen these new graphic novels, I think we would like to hear from you. But more importantly, we were talking about the Delhi calm, which is the emergency period. How you visualized it, what happened. Unfortunately, we don't have a copy of the book here.
The euphemism for it's out of stock, which means it's really sold out. Well, I mean, what a graphic novel? It's another form of comics, right? I mean, so when Will Eisner went to the publisher with a much more serious content, and the publisher said, "Man, these are comics. I can't be publishing them." He says, "Fine, let's market them as graphic novels." So graphic novels became the cool term to market them, and that's how it started off. You know, I mean, when we were kids, I mean, reading comics in school was a banned activity, right? If you would read it under the desks, because your reading habits would be taken away, and you would be getting more sucked in by the visual things. And now we get invited by schools and libraries, lit fests, because we do graphic novels. So we are the new cool. Our books are still in the children's section, right? So Indian graphic novelists have been around there for around 15 years now. We've done around 15 books. And I think we have made a few very brave choices. You know, we have a book on caste, we have a book on same-sex relationships, we have a book on decadence in Bengal, we have a book on partition, so emergency, all of that. So we have had very brave choices, but to think of that book in a children's section, great. So what has happened in the last 15 years is we have made that shift from children's section to a graphic novel section of our own. So that has been the big thing. But essentially what we are doing is trying to merge words and pictures together in form